Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Jazz Confusion Power Hour. I'm your host, Mel Albin, and I want to tell you a little bit about the Jazz Confusion Power Hour and about Source Radio Network. Source Radio Network is devoted to two primary things. One is to jazz, what we call jazz confusion. It's jazz crossover, jazz gospel, jazz rock, jazz R&B, jazz hip hop, jazz reggae, jazz, country. Anything where jazz intersects, because jazz is one of the most important art forms we have in this country. Excuse me. And one of the most important art forms we have in this country, and um, we want to preserve that heritage, and it's a very important element of American culture. And we also are devoted to small Black businesses, and we call them the invisible economy. We support Black businesses that are home based, that are gig workers, that don't have the clout, the money, or the expertise to be on Amazon, which is too expensive, or Shopify. So we provide them with the Shop Black Enterprise Showcase, where we can showcase some of the most incredible small Black businesses you'll find anywhere. So that's what Source Radio is about. In the Jazz Confusion Power Hour, we have artists on every week, and those artists are some of the finest artists in the music industry you'll find anywhere. So, I want you to understand that we're bringing you in-depth interviews and trying to get you to know the artists as well as their music. And tonight, I have a very special guest, and I'm really excited about it. We have Marqueal Jordan, who's a sax player, and he's everything. And this is why I want you to really enjoy Marqueal. Um, Marqueal is, perfect for what the Power Hour does. So, what does Marqueal do besides playing the saxophone? He's a band leader. He's a composer. He's a horn arranger. He's an in-demand touring artist and session musician in the studio. He's an independent recording artist. And we're going to break all this down for you, and you're going to get to know more about Marqueal and his music. So, without further ado, let me bring on our artist of the week, Marqueal Jordan. Marqueal,
Hey,
how are you?
I'm doing great, Mel. How you doing, man? Thanks for
Um,
having me.
it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I've been wanting to have you on for a while. I've been following you for years,
Oh man,
and you're just
that's
an
great.
amazing talent. And
Thank you.
we're going to let your fans and let our audience know a lot more about you by the end of the show, and about your music and where they can see you, and everything you do. So let's start off. First of all, I know you're one of your more recent LPs has been "All We Have Are Moments,"
Yes, yes.
and I want, maybe you can start off by telling everyone what projects are you working on right now, and what events are you going to be appearing at, so your fans and our listeners can come and see you and listen to your music.
Okay. Well, 2023, I'm going to be focusing a lot on the Moments tour, as I call it. I spent most of this year touring with Brian Culbertson. I returned to the band for a little over a year and had a great time with him and another great artist, saxophonist Marcus Anderson. And I want to take this upcoming year to get out and do a lot more performing and support this project. All We Have Are Moments. It's been doing incredibly well and been well received by radio and the fans. So I just want to get out and do a few more shows, and then start working on a new project as the year elapses. So that's kind of the boilerplate of what's going to happen in 2023, and we're securing dates, and I'm going to be doing a few really cool things in the first quarter of the year. I'll be on the Smooth Jazz Cruise um,
Great.
at the end of January. Do 2 weeks on that. I'll be performing with a few artists, but definitely doing several of my own shows as well. And just announced yesterday, I'm going to be playing at City Winery in Chicago on February 27th, which is a
Terrific.
huge show. It's going to be
Yeah.
great, and filling out dates as we go as well. But I'll also be involved with Brian Culberson's Napa Valley Jazz Getaway,
Great.
and Chicago Jazz Getaway later on in the year as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. We're going to have Brian on also in January. He'll be on our show, and he's an incredible multi-instrumentalist. I mean,
Yes.
there aren't any like him anymore, and he does his own staging, his own productions. So you're going to be at the Napa Valley in Chicago with him. You're going to be performing there too. So
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you're gonna have a full plate in 2023. It looks like you're gonna be a busy
Absolutely.
man.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
That's the plan. That's the plan.
Wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about something that I find always interesting about an artist. It's a kind of an environment and their geography. You were born in Los Angeles, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, and now you're a Chicagoan,
Mm-hmm.
and
That's correct.
you were raised in Kansas City for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a geographical mutt, man. But those are the three significant places that I lived. And they really have shaped who I am, as a person.
Well, yeah, to me, I've been to Kansas City many times. Kansas City and Chicago is the home of the blues.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful environment to grow up in. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your childhood years? You started out in Los Angeles. How long were you there, and what did you pick up? When did you pick up the sax? These are the kinds of things I'm curious about.
Sure. I was born leaving out of the tumultuous 1960s. I was born in 1970, and I was born in Los Angeles, one of the few actual native Los Angeles people that you might run into. Is everybody that's there now, they're
Yeah,
from somewhere else.
yeah.
But I lived there for close to 13 and a half years. My father was an auto worker. He worked for General Motors. And my mom, basically at that time, she was just a stay-at-home mom until I was like 6 or 7 years old. And then she started getting a little bit of higher education, and she graduated from one of the Cal State universities. And I've got two older sisters, and I come from a music loving family. Um, I don't know if you could call us a musical family because I think I'm the only musician. But when we were really young, my two older sisters took piano lessons, and I took drums, which really didn't stick. I did that at 5 years old, but whenever I took drum lessons, I would just float around from the piano to the vibes. I was completely unfocused. It was nuts. But I fell in love with music primarily because of my dad. He has a great record collection, so I grew up listening to any great black music that you can think of, from Ray Charles to Johnny Mathis to Melba Moore to Minnie Riperton, stuff like that, and then I grew up listening to a whole lot of jazz. My dad was really into Miles and Train and Pharoah Sanders and Eric Dolphy, Joe Henderson, and just stuff like that. So I grew up listening to that stuff at a really young age. So I realized that I wanted to play saxophone when I was like maybe 6 or 7. At that time, this was during the heyday of magnet schools and busing. So I was going to a school in Hollywood, actually. And ironically enough, it was the school that Michael Jackson attended for a year when they moved to Los Angeles to be part of the whole Motown empire. Name of the school is Gardner Elementary School. So they didn't have any saxophones. So I played clarinet for 4 years and kind of did my thing with that until I could pick up a saxophone in junior high school, which was like age 12 is when I started playing.
What was it about the sax that attracted you? You're doing clarinet. What was it?
Partly, I know my dad kind of pushed me into it because I was really into Train, and like I think that was my first major influence on saxophone was John Coltrane. Just that sound and those records, and just looking at the album covers as a kid, it just struck something in me, and that was it. Really, it was my father and John Coltrane. That's the reason why I wanted to play, and because they didn't have any saxophones in elementary at the time, it was like or play a woodwind instrument. So clarinet is part of the woodwinds. You need to learn how to play that anyway. So play that. I was like, okay, pops. So that's what I did. That's how that worked out.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Then, um, after Los Angeles, at what age did you move? I know you went to Kansas City.
Yeah.
When did that happen? And, how did that affect your musical career?
It actually it was a huge life change and a culture shock, really. Because, I was as most teenagers are when they get into their early teens, trying to figure out what's going on, who they are, and trying to relate socially with their peers, male or female. And I was starting to figure all of that stuff out. But my dad worked, like I said, as he was an auto worker. He worked at General Motors, and his job was always in peril. They start during the early 80s, they were closing a lot of plants throughout the country, but especially on the West Coast. So we primarily relocated pretty much because my dad was stuck with a decision, like either you move to Kansas City, Kansas, or you're out of a job. So that's what brought me there. And then when I realized that that's where Charlie Parker was from,
Yes.
and Count Basie and Lester Young, and then some lesser known legends in Kansas City, like vocalist Ida Macbeth, who I got a chance to see perform.
Wow.
And things like it actually made me take music more seriously. And I wound up moving right around the time that Los Angeles was really starting to turn into a war zone with the crack epidemic and the proliferation of gangs and violence and stuff. So I escaped a lot of that. Kansas City had that. I mean, it's a gangster's town too, just like Chicago
Yeah.
is. But it was definitely a slower way of life, and I got a chance to get into music a whole lot more once I got there.
Well, what kind of gigs did you get, or how did you start growing in Kansas City? Did you go to college? What happened next?
A variety of things. There were a few things that happened. One, I was in high school, so I joined the marching band. I was in the concert band, and then I was in a jazz band. So I was starting to learn how to improvise and play a little bit. And then also there were many peers of mine that moved from California with their families as well. So we got together and we had like singing groups and rap groups. So I was learning how to play keyboards and program drum machines and do stuff like that. So that was my experience in high school. I went to college at the University of Kansas. So I was in the jazz ensemble there. I took private lessons with an incredible saxophonist by the name of Vincent Gonoyak. He still teaches there, and started playing in bar bands basically, which is really where I learned how to play. The academia part of it was cool, but you don't really know how to play until you get on stage and you're playing in front of people and they're drinking and you got to entertain them. That's how you learn. That's how you learn.
Yep. Yes. Yes. How many hours did you perform when you started doing the bar scene? Do you have any idea how many total hours you had put in there?
Wow, that is
I'm
a
asking
great
you.
question.
I'm asking you for a reason. A friend of mine, Malcolm Gladwell, wrote a book about outliers, and one of the things he talked about is that he talked about the Beatles, and everybody thinks they started off with a number one hit,
Hmm.
but they played in Hamburg, Germany, as a band, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. They had played 10,000 hours before they even cut their first record.
Oh
So
wow.
by then they were a polished band,
Hmm.
and that's
Yes.
kind of why I'm asking you, because obviously being a bar band or a bar musician is
Hmm.
not the most high paying part of your career. I know how that works,
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
it's the part where you get the experience like you were talking about in front of a live audience.
Hmm.
And usually it's the same 25 drunks each week.
Right. Right.
but
Exactly.
but the fact is you get to hone your skill,
Hmm.
and get feedback, from a very tough audience very often.
Sure. I would say because I was going to school and we weren't playing full time, probably during that time. And this is a very safe estimate, but probably 2 to 3 thousand hours. I'm
There
sure.
you go.
You
There you
know.
go. And, Marqueal, the reason I'm bringing this up too, a lot of people that listen to music and artists, whether you're a vocalist and you're both a vocalist and an instrumentalist,
Mhm.
they think it's a natural talent to just arrive full blown on the stage one day, and they don't
Yeah.
realize all the hours that a
Oh yeah.
quality musician puts in. You
Absolutely.
know, and
Absolutely.
aside from rehearsals and studio time, the fact is that you have to perform in front of a live audience, and so many great artists started out playing in bars. That's where they start out,
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's where they get the skill. And so it's really important, although not well paying, but important. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's the only person, the only artist and musician that I know that didn't have that rite of passage, ironically enough, is Brian Culbertson. He never played in bar
I
bands.
know, I
He
know.
was in DePaul University's jazz big band, and he did a lot of composing. But everyone else in his band throughout the years that I've been in the band, all the musicians that I've run into in Chicago, and I've been here for close to 28 years, so I've definitely put in 10,000 plus hours on the stages here.
There you go. Yep.
But he didn't have that experience, and it's it's very rare that we don't go out there and get knocked on our butts and get knocked in our heads a little bit and figure out what works, what doesn't work, how to relate to an audience, how to develop stage presence, all of that stuff. He did it
Yeah,
in real time in front of real audiences paying to see him with his name on the venue, whereas we all did it, under the cover of cover bands or different organizations that we were with or wedding bands or any of that kind of stuff. So, yeah,
yeah,
that's crazy.
yeah. Well, that's how people, yeah, that's how musicians really learn their craft. And I kind of want, your fans who are tuning in and also our listeners to understand, the dedication that
Yes.
someone like yourself has to their craft. It's,
Mhm.
of course you need to have talent. You need to have an ear, there's no question. But
Right.
talent isn't enough. Like you said, you have to develop a stage presence. You have to be entertaining, as well as being a quality musician. So,
Yes.
everyone pays their dues, and you did the same thing. Tell me about Kansas State a little bit more. Did you do any composing during that period?
At University of Kansas,
Yeah.
I took a composition class. Our jazz band director had most of the guys that were in the jazz ensemble in there, and then we got so busy with with jazz ensemble that he just gave everybody an A. We didn't do much arranging or any of that kind of stuff. So I did a little bit of writing in college. Obviously, did more writing as I became a solo artist and started actually before that. I started working with a band in Chicago and we were doing original music, but not so much in college. I was really just trying to get my chops together and learn how to play and really learn how to interpret music better and figure those things out. And especially at that time, and I still fight with it to this day, but whenever I would start writing something, instead of completing the thought, I'm like editing the thought or editing the idea and critiquing the idea as I go along, as opposed to finishing it and then going back and looking at it and saying, okay, this is what works, this is what doesn't work. So it was a lot of self-sabotage going on during that period.
Well, that just makes you better at what you do. That's the way it works. Yet
Yeah.
self-critique is important. Do you do any charting or scoring? For Brian or anybody else, or for yourself?
Definitely for myself. I started making my own charts. I've gotten a lot better at it over the years. I did about a year. It's broken up about 3 years with the Isley Brothers, but in their touring
Oh,
band.
terrific.
And like the last year that I was with them, I was the horn arranger, and I put everything together for that situation, which was if there's a video that we shot or a concert that we shot, if it ever sees the light of day, is absolutely amazing. We shot it during the pandemic, and it featured pretty much all of the arrangements that I did. Some I had help with, but most of them I did on my own. So I'm looking forward to it.
I'd like to hear that.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear that myself. Look, you have so many musical influences that you had in your household when you were growing up, and also obviously when you were in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to pick one or two people that were instrumental in really helping you hone your skills and become a professional musician, who would you like to talk about today?
Wow, that's an incredible question. So I'm assuming this is people that I know.
Yeah.
I think, wow, I probably have to say two people. One is a really, really good friend of mine who I started playing in bands with. He was the one I started playing in a bar band with. I auditioned for his band, and we've been friends for 30 years now. His name is Scott Leff. He's not even a professional musician anymore. He has his own business as a consultant, but he's a great guitar player, and we're kind of kindred spirits. And I think I had a lot more of the creativity and the spur of the moment improvisational vibe more than he had, and he had more of the structure and more of the stick to itiveness and the writing and the discipline side. So we worked together really, really well. And we played in bar bands together. He moved to Chicago to break into the blues scene. I think like in spring of 1994, and I didn't think I was going to ever see the guy again. And then through some crazy 24-year-old logic, I wound up moving to Chicago with my college girlfriend as well. And me and Scott reunited, and we started a band together. That's where I developed my stage presence in that band, and it's when I started singing lead vocals because I could sing, but I never took myself seriously as a singer. So I didn't start performing in front of people singing and getting those chops together until I was like 24 years old. That's when I started doing that. So he would be a guy who's been really instrumental. The other guy I would have to say is a DC based guitarist as well. He leads a band called Spur of the Moment. His name is Wayne Bruce, and great musician, great friend. When I joined Brian Culbertson's band, he was the new guy in the band as well. And he put me in a lot of situations where I had to learn music quickly. I had to be ready, and things were chaotic, and things might not have been lined up the way they needed to be, but it's just like, okay, we're going to throw you in the fire. I need you to perform. I need you to produce. And I got comfortable with doing that. And it led to me being featured in the house band on the Capitol Jazz Super Cruises for consecutive years and working with a lot of artists. So I think those two guys, people that I know personally that really, really shaped me into being the person who I am.
Yeah, everybody needs a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it shortcuts so many things when you have people like that you're close with and can influence and help you develop those skills. And that's another part of becoming a great musician. It's mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody has that opportunity. So it's great that you had those kinds of influences as you were developing your music. We mentioned Chicago, but I didn't ask you what made you move to Chicago.
My college girlfriend.
Okay.
That's the short answer. The long answer is we're really trying to figure out what we're going to do, because we graduated at the same time. She wanted to go to grad school, and I definitely had an eye on breaking into some kind of music industry. But I didn't major in music in college. I spent a lot of those years in confusion and denial because I really should have majored in music, but I was thinking practical and thinking, oh, you should have something to fall back on. And it took me a few years to get out of school, longer than it should have. But I got a business administration degree, and we're trying to figure out where the next move was. And Chicago was on the short list of places to live. I really wanted to move back to Los Angeles, but in retrospect, I wasn't ready for that then. So, and the idea of partnering with Scott again was really the driving force for it, because I knew we worked well together, and I knew that we would get something started. So that was primarily the reason. And she wound up going to grad school in Chicago, and then we eventually parted ways several years after. But that was the reasoning. Just a young boy's logic, really.
Getting a business administration degree is, in this contemporary music scene, as indie artists proliferate, isn't a bad thing, actually.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a big part of any musician's career now, is managing business.
absolutely.
So,
And,
yeah.
I didn't see it. I didn't see the vision then, or how it could help. I just saw, okay, I've been in school for 4 years. I need to pick a major that I can get out of school quicker and quickly. And that wound up being
That
the case. Because at
that was
that
it.
point, I wanted to major in music, but I would have started over as a freshman. I couldn't afford it. So, you know.
Oh, it's really so much stuff is serendipitous. You end up in Chicago because of your girlfriend from
Mhm,
college, and also the fact that you met this other person you were working with
mhm.
musically.
Yeah.
But it's not planned. It just emerges, and
Yeah.
it's incredible the kind of influence those kinds of things have on people's career development and personal development. So,
Absolutely.
so let's talk a little bit about the early 2000s a little bit.
Mhm,
You were really highly in demand at that point, to perform with top members of bands,
mhm.
right? That's
Yes.
what you're doing in Chicago. And so, what kind of bands were you performing with? And tell us a little bit about that.
The funny thing about it is, two of those bands I've still actually performed with to this day, locally. So I'll have to give a shout out to my man, brother John, John Kattke, great guitarist, vocalist on the blues scene. Been working with him since 2003, and then um, I dubbed this next band the best band I've ever worked with. It's an old school R&B soul
Oh, wow.
band entitled Midnight Sun. And the band has been around for close to 50 years with different members over time. Um, an incredible story, and I wound up working with those guys since 2004. But besides that, I was starting to do a lot of wedding bands, and just a lot of pickup bands, because there was a lot of work in Chicago when I first moved here. I moved here in '95, so there were a lot of music clubs. The turn of the millennium, the clubs started dwindling, so I started doing a few more wedding gigs, uh, or we in Chicago we call them jobbing gigs. Everybody's got their colloquialism when it comes to that. Like in LA, I think
Right.
they call them socials or something like
Socials.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so I started working with a lot of those different bands, and it felt like purgatory, really, because
It was.
it felt that way, Mel, because I'd gotten so used to being creative and doing original music, and those things that I did with Scott. We had a band entitled Fat Time, which we named after a Miles Davis track on his comeback album.
Yeah.
Um, so that was kind of the direction we were thinking, like jazz fusion, but then it wound up being more like Sly and the Family Stone slash James Brown slash, kind of a rock and soul kind of unit. Um, Once that kind of fizzled out, and then another project that I was involved with fizzled out, it was really just playing other people's music, which at that point I was really frustrated with doing. But I had just got married. My daughter was a toddler at that point, and it just made the most sense. I was working a day job still, but it was like needed the extra income. So I was really a weekend warrior during that time, and that circle just kept getting bigger and bigger. And so then I would start meeting other people that needed a vocalist or needed a saxophonist, or and Chicago is really segregated and really kind of
Mhm.
segmented. So I was lucky in the respect that I could work throughout the city with anybody, because I had learned a lot of styles, could play them pretty proficiently, or I could be hired as a vocalist, or I could be hired as a saxophonist. I knew how to be on time and to learn the music,
Yeah.
so I got hired for studio sessions. I got hired to do the jobbing bands and all of those things. So my reputation just kept growing in town. And I did that for 13 years. It just, I stayed in that bubble for 13 years, and it felt like that's really all that I was going to do. And I didn't realize how well it was going to serve me later. Like, LA was great for a foundation to fall in love with music. Kansas City was great to learn how to play music in a practical sense. But Chicago is definitely my finishing school. The musicians here are, they're not one dimensional. We all know how to play different styles, and we all know how to play in different configurations and different settings. It's the way you have to be in order to make a living here as a musician. So that's what those 2000s were for me. Those first 7 or 8 years before I met Brian.
Let me make a comment about cover songs. I've heard other artists like yourself who are very creative, talk about the purgatory of doing covers and weddings, and but covers are so important because you're really maintaining a tradition,
Absolutely.
of artists that had their day possibly, but and contributed a major amount to the industry and to culture, and you're just keeping it alive. So
Yeah.
I respect covers, especially when they're done, and somebody can make them their own. Another friend of mine, Macy Gray.
Oh
Macy,
yeah.
Macy, she loves covers, and of course she does her own originals, but she loves covers. And when Macy does a cover, it is her own, and
Absolutely.
it's another dimension. It keeps the music alive. It reminds you of the artist that came before her, but she just translates it into something so vibrant and meaningful. So I'm a fan of covers. I think they have a really important place in a musical repertoire. So
Yeah.
that's one thing. And then you mentioned Sly and the Family Stone. I can't think of a more unique sound, consistently, back in the 70s than
Yeah.
Sly.
Yeah. He really revolutionized Black music.
Yes.
Music period.
Period.
But but
Yes.
but definitely, like, if you listen to like the Temptation stuff
Yep.
after Sly hit, you could really hear that influence. The
Yep.
Jackson 5 covered a lot of
Yep.
Sly and the Family
Yep.
Stone. Like that stuff, I it felt like purgatory at the time, but like I said, it was a great finishing
Yeah.
school. And I do have respect for that music. And when I perform, it's with those artists in mind, and it's with the respect to the craft that, they came up with this stuff, which are iconic songs now that really, everybody should have those songs under their belt. Not that they have to perform them or prove it, but it informs the music that I make. It informs the stuff that I want to do going forward.
You know, Again, you're hitting on so many things that are important to music and important to me. There are artists today that, of course, they call it sampling, like John Batiste, who's an
Mhm.
amazing,
Oh yeah.
he's a classically trained pianist, and
Incredible.
amazing. He brings back that vibe, from the 70s and 60s, and and also Bruno Mars.
Oh yeah.
He's done the same thing, and
Mhm.
so you know, not just covers, but reaching back into the culture of music
Yes.
and keeping that alive, because and that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about. Now I'm kind of segueing into it.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Today you listen to radio, and of course I have a radio station, but I listen to radio on FM, and stations that used to play jazz, blues, R&B,
Mhm.
big band. You can't find it now. You find urban music is dominating the airwaves, and that's why internet radio has a special place, because you
Sure.
have the capability. Look, an interview like I'm doing with you, nobody in FM radio does hour-long interviews anymore. That
No.
5 or 10 minutes, and that's the end of the day. And
Mhm.
so um, what's your feeling about the changes in the music industry? That we've seen the music move and progress from big band to rock, to alternative, from blues to R&B to soul and neo soul and hip hop and rap, and And we've seen the technology change, from vinyl to 8-track to cassette to CDs and now streaming, which has
Yeah.
changed the way in which people hear music. The
Yes.
music doesn't sound the same way, certainly to a certain extent. So, what's your feeling being such a creative artist? What's your feeling about where the music industry is today and where you think it's heading?
Well, I'll probably it'll probably sound like I'm going on a tangent, but I will definitely
Go ahead.
answer the
Yeah.
question. So, being born in 1970 and being part of Generation X, I think I'm sitting in a seat where I have a lot of respect for the past, but then I also see the future of where things could be. And I think that's the push and pull and the tug of war, the blessing and the curse of being a Generation X uh, person is that, I grew up listening to albums. I used to read liner notes as a kid. Like I read more liner notes than I read books.
Yeah.
That's how I learned so much about who played what and who was on this and who was on that. So I have a reverence and a respect for all of that. Um, that being said, the music has to keep progressing. And, because of the technology that has informed the music changing too. The blessing about it is that it's kind of even the playing field. I'm an independent artist. So, you know, when Fat Time, the band I mentioned earlier, when we were trying to get a deal in 1999, 2000, it was still the old machinery. We didn't really know anyone. We put out our own record. And at that point, there was a lot of musicians in Chicago, a lot of great bands coming out here like Liquid Soul and
Mhm.
Smashing
Yeah.
Pumpkins and a lot of
Yeah.
great bands doing their thing here, but there was no industry here, so to speak. There were no more record labels. Record Row had been long gone and all of those kinds of things. So it was hard to get noticed. And if we had the power of the internet at that time, who knows what would have happened. But our records just kind of we did a couple of do-it-yourself records and they just died. Um, and I think that led to my being jaded about everything and feeling like I was in purgatory because I felt like no one's going to find me, no one's going to see. I know I have talent, but I'm in my mid 30s. I'm starting to age out as far as I thought of the music, and then the internet came along, and it just evened the playing field. So the great thing about it is that an artist like myself can be seen. I can talk to you, and I could reach music lovers and fans in a variety of different ways through this medium, through downloads, and through streaming. The curse of it is that, the apparatus is set up so much now that everybody's doing it
Yes.
that
Yes.
it's just it's hard to separate the great or the good from the
Yes.
mediocre. And then also, just financial from a financial standpoint, the royalties aren't the same. Record sales are
Yeah.
non-existent. I print up
Yeah.
CDs, but they're almost for promotional pieces or for people who
Yeah.
come to the shows and they want like a keepsake. They want something to remind them, but they probably don't even have a working CD player anymore.
Yeah.
So it's definitely helped me because if I wanted to do what I was doing now 20, 25 years ago, it would be impossible to do it. Um, at least on the scale that I'm doing it now. Um, but it's how do you become seen in a crowd of millions? How do you make yourself
Boy.
stand out? You know,
Marquel, perfectly said. Because you know when now when people stream, yes, you can be heard, but you can be heard for 0.0008 cents per play.
I
So
know.
after 100,000 plays, you made $800.
Yeah. What are
So
you gonna do?
so
Yeah.
everybody used to talk about the record labels ripping off artists, which they did, particularly black artists. But
Sure.
now the streaming services are doing it even worse.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's missing now is A&R. The other thing you're talking about: how do you
Yes.
get heard? How do you get what's your image? How do you dress? How do you perform on stage? there's so much that is now reliant on the artist himself in the area where they have no skill,
Hmm.
and it's very tough. There's somebody I know well. His name's Angelo Ellaby. He's a publicist, double exposure out of New Jersey,
Hmm.
and
Part of them,
he,
yeah.
he's terrific. And he does A&R now. He offers that as a service because you can't get it anymore. You
No,
can't get that branding and that image development.
yeah,
So yes, yes, it's allowed every artist. It's two things. It's Woody Allen who's saying 80% of life is just showing up.
hmm,
So yes, you can be seen.
hmm,
Okay, and then the other thing is, Andy Warhol's. Everyone's going to have that 15 minutes of fame,
yeah,
and, and those two things have come to pass. But
right.
it's a tough world for a musician today, because there's so many dimensions to the business they have to learn or find good management, which is not easy to find either.
Hmm.
So so yeah, it's a double-edged sword. You can be seen, and you could be broke.
Yeah, exactly. And the still the machinery of the network still exists. Like
Yes,
even though the playing field is kind of evened at this level, but there's still certain doors that I can't get in. You know,
yes,
and you only can get in those doors if someone either pulls you in or if you're doing so well on your own that they want a piece of the action themselves. So
right.
it's a challenge, but I've paid the price to do this. So, and I've done other things. So it's a trade-off at this point that I'm happy to live with at this point. I
Yeah.
can't and don't want to do anything else.
So where do you see yourself as a musician, going within this culture we've just been talking about, and within your own creativity? Where will Marqueal be 5 and 10 years out from now? What do you think you'll be doing? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Been thinking about that a lot lately, because I live really in the moment, and so I'm really trying to think more strategically and plan. To varying degrees of success, but I definitely within the next 5 years, I definitely want to put out an album. Um, you know, um, Traditional jazz is my first love as a musician, so I see myself putting out a record along those lines. My favorite saxophonist is Branford Marsalis.
Oh
So
yeah, oh yeah.
yeah, I would love to put out a record like a record that Branford would put out. Um, I also see myself doing a complete all vocal album, and just, you know, because I'm an independent artist and the way that this industry has changed so much, you know, I'm a musical chameleon and I would like to explore that. And I would like to build a fan base that would take every turn that I take with me, and be comfortable riding in that car with me, not like hanging on the back bumper, like, hey, you're taking us somewhere we don't want to go. Like, oh, this is just what Marqueal does. Oh, I've seen him on stage. I've seen him, you know, do a rap song before. I've seen him do just all vocals and kill the show, or I've seen him just play a John Coltrane tribute at a supper club, and he was amazing doing that. So I want to be able to be, kind of a chameleon in the next 5 years. And I don't, because this is happening with me as far as being a solo artist at this age that I am, you know, I would like to enter in like after 10 or 15 years from now, being able to make choices of being in the industry because I want to, not because I have to. I see a lot of great artists like still on the road after their time, and they don't sound the same. They've had some health challenges, but they're out there primarily because I feel like they have to be. Now, I don't know because I don't know them personally, but I would imagine if you had a standard that was way up here and you're still touring 40, 50 years later and your standard is right here because you just can't physically do the same things, it just leads me to think that, those artists are out there because they have to be out there to make money, which is the biggest frustrating thing about, how black music is treated and how black artists are treated.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
the Stones
Yeah.
could tour till they're 90 and make $1 million a
Yes.
show
Yeah.
as individuals, not the
Yeah.
band. Like
Yeah.
as an individual stepping
Yeah.
on stage, Mick can make 7 figures,
Yeah.
whereas somebody like the OJs who are retiring this year, or they just retired
Yeah.
last year, um, they're seeing a fraction of that to split amongst 3 people,
Yeah.
and it's a travesty, especially when the foundation of all great music is from black music anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to focus something on you a little bit, and I think it's a positive. I would describe you as a late bloomer.
Hmm.
Now, I don't know if that you think that fits or not,
It
but
does.
yeah, but I think that that's important because part of what you're saying is about aging musicians, and they were up here and then they're down here. Part of the reason they're still touring is because the managers are vultures.
Yeah.
They don't want to let go, and they actually push them beyond where they should be performing, even though they may not even need to. And
Right.
it's just bad management, for self-serving purposes. But I said, you're like a late bloomer. What would you say to young musicians, who maybe have to give it up and get a day job, and
Hmm.
maybe want to come back to it later? What kind of encouragement would you offer to them?
I guess I would just say, look at my example, because I thought it was over for me. I really, really did. And the thing that changed for me was when the opportunity came, all of those gigs that I did prepared me for, you know, a random meeting with Brian Culbertson by the suggestion of a friend of mine who's the drummer in his band, Chris Miskell. And after meeting Brian and him hearing me play and hearing me sing, the entire world changed for me. And I was 37 years old at that point.
Here you go.
So
Okay.
if it could happen for me, I think it can happen for anybody. And so I guess I would say, one, pick music or do music that's timeless. Don't do music that's trendy, um, because you can age into that music. There's no age limit for jazz. There's no
That's
age
right.
limit for great soul music. I
Right.
mean, I almost feel like you need to be of a certain age to do great soul music at this point.
Yes.
Um, so that would be it. Be one of the things I would say. I would also say, don't chase the trends of trying to imitate a certain artist or jock a person's style or image or whatever. Be unapologetically yourself, because that's the thing that someone's waiting for. And I think the blessing about what you just mentioned, being a late bloomer, I'm so much more confident now at the age
Right.
of 52
Yeah.
than I was at 32. I questioned everything. I didn't, if I heard a certain saxophone player, I was like, oh, I need to sound more like that. And then I would try to sound like that and then forget my own sound and my own voice. And it's cool to do all of that. We all have heroes and we all have people that we're into and that we try to emulate. But at some point, you've got to find your own sound and you've got to develop it. And that takes time.
Yeah. Well put. And one of the things when you talk about your current age, one of the positive aspects of that, I would call it thin slicing, that you have the capability to know what you know, to hear what you've heard, and you could cut through so much to get to the core of what you are now that you couldn't do when you were younger.
No, not at
You know,
all.
so
Not at all.
yeah, so that kind of maturity is a blessing, and unfortunately, we live in a society where aging is frowned upon.
Yes.
And especially for black musicians, it's like you said, Mick Jagger could be 85, which he will be very soon,
Yeah.
and still get 7 figures.
Yeah.
You know, and so there is that bias also within the music industry. So
Hmm.
let me ask you this other question. If you looked around everywhere in the world and you had a bucket list of someone you would love to perform with on stage, who would that be?
Oh
It could
man.
be a vocalist, it could be a musician. Who would it be?
Um, and I'm just gonna narrow this down to people who are alive. Because
Yeah.
if we
Yeah.
go further, it would be nuts. But Michelle Ndegeocello is one of my favorites of all time.
Okay.
Um, so I would love to perform on stage with her.
Does she
Her,
know that?
I've never met Michelle. I've said it in a few interviews, but I don't know if she's got a chance to hear it. Herbie Hancock,
Oh yeah.
Sting,
Yeah.
um,
Oh wow. Yeah.
Branford would be great. And I have a really good friend, fellow saxophonist by the name of Chris Green, who knows him. So that could happen. It might not ever happen, but uh, so I think those guys would be those artists would be tops of the list, and maybe Q-Tip from A Tribe Called Quest.
Quest. Yes. Yeah.
You know, you
Good
know,
list.
yeah, that's a pretty. I would love to work with or perform with any of those people. I've just always loved and looked up to their music, and I finally got a chance to see Herbie live
Oh yeah.
last year, and I was totally blown away. Totally blown
Amazing.
away.
Amazing. The two you mentioned, Branford and Herbie. You can't do better than that, really.
Oh,
You know.
no, not at
Good.
all. Not at
Okay.
all.
So, what if you were going to tell an aspiring musician something that's the most important thing? I think you already said it.
Hmm.
Um, what would you tell them? I know you said be true to yourself, and I think that's probably the most important thing.
Hmm.
But what other advice can you give them? Given the music industry today.
Oh man, what I've seen with younger musicians, especially, is that these guys and gals, they're multi-instrumentalists. Like they know, with us it used to be just like pick an instrument and play it.
Right.
These they know all kinds of they can play saxophone, keyboards, drums, bass. They can play anything. They're pretty much one person bands at this point. I think what's missing though in a lot of that music is the heart. They've got the sound down,
Yes. Boy.
but a lot of the music just does not touch me like that. And I think it's most important to learn how to be
Wow.
effective as a musician in dealing with emotion, like in conveying that emotion. I know I'm not the greatest saxophonist or vocalist, but I think I do both really well together, and I think there's an emotion that comes out when I perform. I finally think, especially with this current record, that emotion really comes through on in the music, in the recorded music as well. So I think it would be most important to learn how to be a great musician, but then learn how to be emotive,
Boy.
learn to have great technique to the point where you're not just playing a bunch of notes, but you're conveying an emotion to people.
You hit that right on the head. I had Mickey Howard on the
She's
show.
great. She's great.
Yes, and I went to see one of Mickey's shows. I wrote a review about Mickey's shows, and she doesn't just sing the words; she bends the words.
Hmm.
How she pronounces vowels. There's an emotionality to the
Yeah.
word that isn't just just not repeating the lyric, but you're creating a new way of hearing the lyric, and it has to do with that emotionality. And so much music is devoid of that emotional intensity. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right,
Yeah.
and and that's what makes Mickey so great in my mind. It's not that she has a great voice. It's our understanding of the meaning of the word and the music and the intentionality that
Yeah.
lies behind it.
Yeah.
And
She,
yeah, so
it,
so Marqueal, you hit it right on the head. It's if anything for a young artist is plug into what things mean, not just technically what they do.
right.
And that's not easy, and everyone doesn't get there. But
Yeah.
that's the important part of music, and that's where people connect to it too.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And you're more prone to remember that experience or to remember that artist, or you carry
sure.
them close to your heart because they touched you in a certain way. It's like, oh, that I went to go see them and they were incredible. You may not remember any song, you may not remember specific moments, but you just remember how they made you feel.
Feel exactly,
you know
exactly. Well, look, I've enjoyed this so much, and and when you work on your next project, I want to have you back again. I'd love to have you back, and you know, um, how can people reach you if they want to, get in contact with you, or or hire you, and how would they reach you?
Um, you can reach me a variety of different ways. My website is marquealjordan.com. You can definitely send me an email there if you're interested in joining like the e-blast list, or knowing my schedule is, or inquiring about booking me. That's the place to go. But I also have a social media imprint as well, or footprint, if you will. So I'm on Instagram under my name as well, Marqueal Jordan. I don't use Twitter as much. We won't get into all of that, but under my name as well. And on Facebook, I have got a personal page which is full, but I do have a music page which is Marqueal Jordan Music, and those are the places that you can find me. And Mel, this has been incredible. Thank you for having me, and it's great to talk about music and art in a way that's different from the average interview. Like this is, this forced me to think about some things and really answer them honestly. And this is incredible, man. Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
Would love to
thank
come
thank
back.
you. Yeah, I want everybody to know that Markwell will also be a featured artist, and you'll be able to come to Source Radio Network, and we'll have one of his songs behind his biography, and you can get to listen to him and request his music on Source anytime at all. He's part of our rotation now, and it's an honor to have you here, and I wish you the very best, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Mel.
Thank you.
God bless you, man. Appreciate you.
You too. You have a wonderful, have a great 2023.
Absolutely. You